All right, we are live. Great.
Now.
So, hello, everyone. Welcome to Unveiling, the podcast. And my name is Jordan Bain, and my guest tonight is Jake LoPresti. The topic that we're going to be discussing, hi, Jake, is called How to Get Unlost. And Jake and I, we touched base briefly about this, and this topic just really kept standing out to me. So, I don't even know in these podcasts everything that we're going to talk about. I just go with the flow, and I'll be discussing this as a general thing with Jake. We'll see what comes forward. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'll say a little bit about myself. So again, my name is Jordan, and I'm a modern mystery school guide and Kabbalah instructor. I first found this work about 15 years ago and first started doing this full time about 10 years ago. And in 2011, about a year after I really started this as sort of my full-time job and career, whatever you want to call that in the world, I met Jake, and we've been working together on and off ever since. He moved a couple of years after that out to the West Coast, and he's actually just right now moving back to the East Coast. So he just is an awesome guy. Had a child a year and a half ago.
2.5.
2.5. Oh my God, it's been a long time. Time flies. So thank you for coming on tonight, Jake. It's a pleasure having you, and I'd love to hear you just say a little bit about yourself so people can get to know you.
Sure. I'll have to only say a little bit. I get a little carried away sometimes. But yeah, like you said, used to live in Massachusetts, moved to Colorado, went to Oregon. Now I'm living in the Southeast down here. Probably staying here for a little while, which is cool. But like you said, started doing some work with you, which was great, and carried it with me across the country. Been helping people out everywhere I go. I'm also a guide in the mystery school. So I've been doing initiations and helping people out wherever I can. And yeah, mostly that's me. I got my wife who's also doing similar stuff with me. We have a practice together, same exact amount of time. We've done literally almost everything in the school together, side by side. And then, yeah, have a daughter named Adia, who was born 2.5 years ago. And she's just a gigantic ball of light in a tiny human body. So, yeah.
Cool. So let's dive right in. You know what? I'd love to hear from you because you've gone through so many. You are such a different person today than you were 3 years ago, than you were 5 years ago, than you were 7 years ago, than you were when I met you 9 years ago. You and I met at like a holistic fair, like a wellness expo type thing.
Yeah, yoga and chant.
Yeah. Yoga and chant festival.
Yep.
So, and the evolution that I've seen just in you and in so many people that I work with over the last 9 years is tremendous because, I know people from high school, right? And, several decades later, they are still kind of the same person.
Yeah.
You probably have this experience with people that you know as well. And that I went to my best friend's wedding a couple of years ago, and I saw a lot of people who I haven't seen in many years. I went to my college reunion 2 years ago, and I also saw people I haven't seen in 10, 15 years. And I was just like, oh my God, you guys haven't changed. I love you. You're great. Like it just brought me right back to high school or brought me right back to college. But a lot of the people that I re-met, so to speak, because I haven't seen a lot of them in many years in person, seemed like they were really, really, really still kind of thinking, talking, acting, doing the same types of things and being in the same ways. And again, I don't mean that as a criticism, but just like that's sort of a normal thing. It's like a normal course in life for a lot of people. And when I work with people long term, like yourself, and I get to, even though you haven't lived in the Boston area for I don't even know how many years it's been, but I get to see your growth because with the mystery school, we go up to international programs in Canada and I travel around the world. I mean, not right now with COVID, but in general, travel around the world a lot. And so I see different people, several times a year, like yourself. And every time I see you, we're both different people. So I'd love to hear from you I don't know if I can ask for a summary of the last 9 years, but like how much time do we have? These are only 45-minute podcasts. But I'd love to hear from you a little bit, like what that journey's been like for you since the time when you and your lovely wife Danielle first got initiated, which is almost exactly 9 years ago. Like it was like the fall of 2011, I think. So Tell us a little bit for a few minutes about like what is that journey for you? Like when you found the school and how that started evolving for you, and what you feel has shifted over this last almost 9 years.
Yeah, it is kind of insanely fast, especially like just to like super quickly tap in on even like who I was somewhat before even jumping into the school. Like just the fact that I was pretty not lost, but I really didn't feel like I had much purpose in anything, and I was just kind of like living life for its like earthly pleasures.
Mm.
I was just like into like drinking and doing drugs and partying and like all that stuff, and that was something that as I started in those experiences having like more of a grasp on what I felt was seeing a spiritual side to it and like little glimpses into it, and just mostly that I was like not able to hold on to them. So that's why I was even seeking to try to get a better understanding of it, because I'm like, look, I'm doing these like hardcore like substances that are making me see crazy stuff like different dimensions and parallel realities and so on, whatever. Like, not, not to get into that subject, but it was something where I'm like, how can I gain control over that world rather than something giving me glimpses but having control over me, right?
Right.
So then when a series of synchronicities led me to be able to meet you, which was really cool, because I would talk about things with all my friends at that time, which I could still talk to and would probably still confuse them. But I would be like, what do you think dreams are made of? Or, what do you,
Mm.
say these, like, whatever, it's the deeper subjects. And they're like, I don't know, that's far out. But I would talk to you. I remember like talking to you at that expo, and like everything, you're like having a conversation with me. And I'm like, oh, so someone has explored these realms on a conscious level and in a sober level and can relay that. So it
Yeah.
really went from me trying to find answers to things to slowly beginning to feel like I was finding answers. And then as I began to find answers, I was more starting to ask other questions and then find more answers, ask questions. And then it really started to like, I'm looking all this time on the outside world because I was fascinated by it. And I started to become aware of the fact that it was all stuff that I should really be asking about on the inside.
Mm.
And it was something that continuously searching out there, like I said, like, what are dreams made of? Or why is the universe here? Like, why is this all created? And like all that stuff. It's like, yeah, but why am I here? Like, why am I created?
Mm.
What am I made of? Like, and that's something that I started to really tap into, that started that better journey of transformation.
It
Uh,
sounds like you were asking different questions.
yeah, totally. And it's something that it's like, I think initially I need to have certain questions answered to be able to know that there's other ones, right? There's a certain
Mhm.
foundation that needs to be laid down for me to be like, okay, well, I guess since all that basic stuff's answered out in the world, you ask those questions and certain things might give you answers, but they give it in a way that leads you wanting more. And it's
Mhm.
like you've hit a ceiling in those kinds of things. So it's like
Yeah.
you'll never get to the point where you're asking internally.
Yeah. Interesting.
So
Say more about that. Say more about that internal, like what was that flipping point, or that switch that shifted for you where you really said, I have to get internal answers. Like what, I know you're talking about the flow of it, but I'd love to hear more about that. What really brought you to that point? What was the turning point?
you know, I don't know if there was necessarily a turning point. I
Mm-hmm.
think honestly, the biggest turning point probably would have been Kabbalah, which was like 4 years after moving from Massachusetts. So that's like probably 6 years after starting this work in general, something
Yeah.
like that. And that's when it was probably a really intense turning point, because I mean, you already know Kabbalah is like all about like diving inward and like really,
Right.
really figuring out who you are.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but along the way, still, like I even think with like the life activation, getting that done, I remember I didn't even know that the life activation changed me in any way until months later,
Mm-hmm.
when enough people had told me that I seemed different, that I actually had to think like, how am I different? And like dive inward and be like, oh,
Yeah.
this is how, and then be like, how did that happen? And I was like, oh, damn, I did that thing with this guy once. And all of a sudden my life's been different ever since then.
It's
And then,
interesting how that works.
yeah, I'm not self-aware enough at that time too to be able to be like the next week. Like I do it for some people now, and they're like the next day they're like, oh my gosh, my life has shifted and changed in all these ways. And I'm like, great. But at that time for me, it was like 3 months go by and then other people have to tell me that my life
Mm.
changed for me to like reflect on it. Right.
Yeah.
But as that happened more and more, I think it was like, cool, let me go down this path, because if that's changed enough that other people see it before me, now I want to be able to do more and more and see how I'm going to change, because if I can change, that means my life can change. And at that time, again, like I was coming out of my life being such one of like lack mentality, like one of like minimalism, like one of, not honoring my royalty, my greatness, like not knowing who I am as a divine being.
Mm-hmm.
I was literally just kind of going with the flow of things and being like, oh, I'm here just to live and experience and be gone. And,
Mm-hmm.
not thinking that there was any greater purpose to it, which is fine. Like, that's what some people do. Like, that's great. That's their, maybe that is their purpose. But I always felt this like super divine calling inside, that I have like great power and, magnificence, and I should be doing things, but I was always living my life of mediocrity.
Yeah, interesting. So
So
Kabbalah was like a,
as I started to change, I was just like looking more and more at it, like, how are these things doing it? And I'm like, well, if they're doing it, that means I'm doing it. So who am I really that I'm able to make these changes?
so that's a really powerful question in terms of really starting to actually wonder who we are,
Yeah.
you know, and we can learn a lot by asking that, like maybe more than almost any other question, really diving in and asking, who am I? And I
Totally.
don't mean just a meditation, but really wondering and living our life from that place. And it's interesting for you that you're saying that, it was maybe 5 or 6 years into this work before you stepped into Kabbalah and started going to that deeper level. And you've done other stuff in the school, but that was like a turning point moment. So what was it for you uh, with Kabbalah and with wanting to know who you are, that led you toward, like, because you've so many of the changes that I've seen you make were not in the first year or two, they were in the last 5 years.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just something that, like, yeah, I think that that's something that was a couple different factors there.
Yeah.
One was the integration time, that I think is honestly, even with this work, like pretty heavily overlooked. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people think like and get excited when they start changing. They're like, oh my gosh, my life is shifting. I'm going to do it more and more and more and more. And they go
Right.
faster and faster and faster with it.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of people even just burn out, because it's like you're not allowing the things that are changing in you to have the time to like really sink in.
Yeah.
So some of it was intentional. Some of it still came from like the fact that what we wanted more in life was to just move. And we got out to Colorado. There was nobody out in Colorado offering this work. So
Mhm.
the only times I was able to really do anything that helped me shift and change was like going up to Toronto to do it. And at that time, I wasn't connected enough with like our, countrywide network. I didn't know
Mhm.
like other people out in San Francisco and people that were in Minnesota and, all these
Right.
places were nearby that I could have. So that was something where it was mostly just like everything that I had done at that point was really like integrating and settling deeper into me, which helped me to get to really feel just more comfortable with myself more than just like always changing. It was like I got really comfortable with myself. And I think I built this strong foundation that when I
Mhm.
then finally was like, I want to do more. And at that time too, like my wife even wasn't very heavily focused on all of the work, whereas I was going to Toronto all the time. She was just like,
Mhm.
whatever, I'm going to live life and have a fun time. And
Mhm.
then when I wanted to do Kapala, she's like, cool, let's do it together. And that was a big thing too, having partnership. And when you're in a partnership that somebody else is kind of like in the doing the same things as you, it's easier to bounce back and forth.
Yeah.
Whereas other times where I'm like, I'm going through this change, she's like, that's awesome, I'm happy for you. And then like that's the,
Right.
great, keep it up, have fun. Instead of just being like, oh my gosh, cool, tell me about it, like what is it? And she's the one that really helps me even dig deeper, right? Like
Mhm.
even when I said like I didn't recognize my life changed for 3 months, and then she was even like, when did that start happening? And I dove into it. Having her as
Yeah.
a partner, I think honestly, just as like a male archetype, I think it's sometimes harder to do the introspective work.
Right.
So having my wife there is like a beautiful female archetype. She helps me like by being like, no, go in more. Like, what is it? So
Yeah.
I think that we just, yeah, I did a lot of integrating during those years, which was really great. And then when it was time to like unleash, it was like the, seed settling in, and then like coming above the ground. And then when it was finally time to bloom, like Kabbalah literally was just like helped to bloom. And then just like now, ever since then, I've just been, not only comfortable with my foundation of who I am, but then from looking at who I am more and more and more, just getting deeper and deeper and deeper into that understanding.
Awesome. And you became a guide when, like, because you're now, doing initiations and helping other people to find their own way through their lives.
Yep. Yeah, I think that was 2 years ago, something like that.
2 years ago, yeah.
Somewhere around there. Yeah, and I've done other things like in the school doing like ritual master stuff, and like again doing Kabbalah. Kabbalah is what helped to lead into that space a lot more easily. It was definitely like a solid. Again, the more I looked at myself, the easier it was. Once the more I know myself, I'm just like, well, what do I really? If I know who I am, what does that mean for the world outside of me? Whereas the opposite, before I was looking, what's outside of me, and then what does that mean I am? Like I had the script flipped, and now that it's flipped back the other way and I'm looking inside and I'm like, who am I? Okay, now I know what it is out there. I realize like I'm making everything in the world outside of me.
Yeah. That's empowerment. That's when we can really make a change, is when we're the ones in charge of it. So, that ability to own that, it feels like I see a lot of people post things on social media. I watch different people's videos, and a lot of people have a lot of concepts about what spirituality is. A lot of people put forward ideas and teachings even. And something that I find so unique when I watch someone go through this work that we do in the school is that it really, I don't like to use this word force, but I guess it's the best way to say it. It like forces someone to really live the teachings.
Yeah.
And it's like you still have the free will to not, but if you want to go forward and be yourself and integrate this work, you have to live it. Like you have to be, you can't be lost and then help someone else get unlost. You're not able to, like, you can't give something to someone else that you're not in a place to embody yourself. And that seems so simple, right? But it's not wisdom that a lot of people in the world seem to have right now, which is just kind of interesting. What are your reflections on that with what you see, like on social media or in people or in friendships? Like what do you witness about people's ability to embody their philosophies, their concepts, what they're talking about? What do you see?
It's interesting. One, I have been intentionally avoiding a lot more social media nowadays, but when I am out on it, so the interesting thing, like you say all that stuff, the way I've actually talked to people about it, that I feel like I see it, is a lot of people talk to me when I mention some of these concepts and try to like think of practical ways to apply them in their lives. They're like, oh no, I know that. And I'm like, okay, well, if you know that, like where like you're bringing a problem to me, but you're telling me you know the answer.
Right.
Like, so then how come it's not being fixed? And that's something that
it's a great way to keep friends.
Yeah. I'm not the best at that, but it's something. I'm like way too blunt for a lot of people, but I instead metaphorically can at least look at it in a way of being like, look, it's one thing to know information, because that's almost just like if you look at the blueprint of a house and you're like, know every detail about it. You put together the blueprint, you can know that this is how long the walls are, this is how tall it is to the ceiling, this is the angle of the roof. You can see the blueprint, but you've never actually like walked through the house. Like you've never been in there and touched the walls or had your feet on the carpet. Like if someone asked you to truly explain to them that house, you seeing the blueprint and having the concept of it isn't going to be as practical as if you actually were in the home explaining it to them in the details of your firsthand in-person experience.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I was just talking with a student who's taking some metaphysical classes in New York City. And she was discussing how like the teacher was teaching about Kabbalah and was talking about different concepts of the different spheres on the tree of life. and how those relate to other metaphysical concepts. And this student has taken Kabbalah several times with mystery school. And she was like, but this doesn't really line up at all. And what the teacher was saying isn't really consistent with what we actually learn about Kabbalah. And, she's really like a reader and a researcher, and she's read these different books on Kabbalah. So it wasn't even just she has the mystery school perspective on, maybe what we teach about Kabbalah, but she was saying that this guy didn't really seem to understand what he was talking about. And I asked her, I was like, well, has he really studied Kabbalah? And she's like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, but he's teaching a professional paid class about all these different aspects of the mysteries and doesn't practice them. And I was like, well, how is he going to really guide the students to a better place, to a place in their lives? And that, I think, is a huge thing with different teachers and systems that I found in addition to or prior to the mystery school. Early on when I started this work, I also, I sort of started slowly like you did. And it took me about 5 years. It took me 5 years before I even went to Healers Academy, which is like that second step of initiation in the mystery school. And during those 5 years, I took Kabbalah a couple of times, but I also studied a lot of other things on the side. And I didn't fully understand what the mystery school even was. It took me 5 years to really even get what I was doing with this work. And that's one of the reasons like I'm starting this podcast, is to give people a touch point to be able to see the different lives of different mystery school initiates and what their journey has been like. And it might seem like we're just talking, we're having fun, we're laughing about stuff, we're reflecting on different topics, but this, I think it can be really valuable for people just to hear, your story and the things that you've been through and just your authenticity. I was, and see how different this work really is over the long term, like how it plays out in people's lives. Because anyone can like go to a seminar and feel empowered for a weekend and get really like ramped up, and they can do some self-hypnosis and NLP, and they can really do a lot of affirmations. They can do transformational events, that sort of thing, and then the energy fades and it kind of, it's not really there anymore afterwards. But with this work in the mystery school, you get initiated or you get life activated or you do Kabbalah, and you don't even have to notice it, is what you're saying, that day. You don't even have to notice it that month, but yet it's there. It's helping you. That energy is there supporting you, and it really just gets stronger over time.
Yeah. I mean, even looking at like the, just the basic like life activation, like so powerful. But if you think about it on how it's actually, like we talk about how it activates your DNA, which on a physical level technically would be like 7 years before your whole body like cycles through all of the cells and goes through, and like your activated DNA is integrated into your physical form, which means like how long on an energetic form is it actually taking to fully and totally integrate? Like it's there, it's happened, like the change is there, but what still needs to happen? Because that would be a giant shock to so many people's systems if we're just like, boom, you're fully and totally, vibrant and awake, and now you're never going to live life the same. Like we would literally be walking around like seeing rainbows everywhere and like not being able to process life.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't happen like that.
Actually, there have been some people that have told me similar things, but again, some people can handle it. But it's something that, like we think about it, like our brain needs to, even in figuring something out, go through so many stages to get to where we figured it out. And we act as if like we don't have also maybe a hyper consciousness or even like that to our energetic body that needs to go through a certain number of stages to be able to figure out who it is.
Yeah.
And it's something when you were even saying before with like all the stuff that people are posting and saying or going to seminars or getting amped on certain stuff, like for me, I've personally seen a lot of it is kind of just turning into like brain candy. Like spirituality is being like transmuted over into brain candy, where it's like, now I know all these things, and it's like, therefore I feel like I, have some power over it, which is like, it's not about that. It's about how like you have that knowledge, and therefore how can you practically apply it in your life to integrate it and kind of get it out of the brain. Like the brain has like so powerful that it can turn good things bad and bad things good. So like, why would we let all that wonderful information sit in the brain where it can transmute and turn and change, instead of dropping it down into the heart, where our heart only speaks truth and is only going to be able to integrate it throughout us in the way that's most beneficial?
Yeah. It's interesting. Here we are on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Talking on the internet. And yet almost every single thing we do in the mystery school can only be done in person, right?
Yeah.
So, and I have people say all the time, well, especially with COVID, they're like, so can we do this on Zoom? And I'm like, no, we can't do it on Zoom. What about the activation? No, we can't do that. What can I take the class? No, 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 we can't. It has to be in person. And then most people that I say that to are actually like, well, that's such a relief. It's such a relief because I'm so sick of just taking an online course.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. I mean, online courses were not a thing like 10 years ago. And now things have moved so quickly, people are already sick of them, which is kind of hilarious to me. I'm like, wow, it's like 10 years after online courses even became a thing. People are like, I'm over that. I don't want an online course for this thing. I don't want an online mystery school that, I
Yeah.
put my third eye up to monitor and I get initiated. And then because someone said so, and they don't really even have a lineage behind it. They don't have real empowerment behind it. They just, channeled it, or they pulled it through from the ethers one day, or they dreamed about it. And then they created this system that has good intentions behind it, but no energy, or only the energy of the person doing it. And
Yeah.
and so then I'm finding a lot of people really relieved that the way we teach is really just in person. And there's only a few things we can really do online, like a podcast, or like a guided meditation or something like that. But
Yeah.
the real core of our energy work has to be authentically in person, teacher to student, handing it down directly into the energetic structure of that student or that client, so they can really receive it fully. And I think as we continue going forward in the digital age, people crave more and more real contact with themselves rather than just the concepts, because the internet can convey concepts. It's like the strength of the internet is to convey ideas and philosophies and belief systems and concepts. And like you said, when we have too much of that, we just get lost in it. And when we can't feel ourselves, so we have to learn the skill of coming down into our hearts.
Yeah.
And developing that muscle that desires real integration of ourselves, of teachings, of how we manifest.
I think it's also tricky too, like learning anything online. Like think like it's one thing when you learn from one source, right? You've worked with people and you've worked with me for like 9 years now, right? So it's like when
Yeah.
I come to you and I talk to you and I trust you, you give me some advice or something, I'm like, cool, I trust that source.
Right.
If you're going to learn a class online, your source technically, yeah, it might be through like one person, but it's coming through the internet.
Yeah.
And on a weird subconscious level, we also go on the internet and hear a lot of fake news and like false information and
Mhm.
just like angry and lies and like a lot of terrible things too. So like we jump on and say, this is the screen is where I'm going to get all my information from, the good and the bad. You
Mhm.
might have some trouble discerning like what is feeling authentic to you after a certain point. So
Yeah. That's what's sort of scary to me about the younger generations now, especially kids who are in their teenage years, or and their entire learning experience. I mean, see what's happening with COVID right now too. I have lots of clients with young children, children under 10 years old, and they're totally homeschooling their kids, and they're doing it through Zoom.
yeah,
Or their kids are going to school, but they're actually going to school in their home on Zoom. And it's a little like, it's this huge experiment as to like, will these kids even be able to function the way you and I function?
yeah,
Will their brains be able to understand human connection? Will their souls be in their body through a process of emotional mirroring? Like, there's a way that if we can't, let's say it this way, if we can't like get the emotional mirroring from somebody else on a soul level, like being there with them in person, like I'm not sure that this kind of contact does that. um
yeah, we can't really hold hands here. Like, well,
no. And we can't really reach each other in the same way.
yeah, I mean, even us talking right now, like it's beautiful, it's wonderful to communicate, but there's a totally different thing that happens when you have an energetic transfer, like that occurs between each other when you're actually like, I talk and in my energy field, like it moves out to you, you talk, it comes back to me. There could be like a connection with our auras intertwining, like all these different things that to a lot of people that are like even used to this, I know people that only communicate through the computer because they have anxiety. And they're like, well, when I'm on a screen or I'm on a video, yeah, I can be myself and I can be joking and fun and happy and cool. But then when I'm with a person, or even with me sometimes, like they're just like, I'm just feeling a little anxious. Like I just don't know how to behave. And there's
Right.
an energetic component that I'm like, well, you're in somebody else's energy field compared to over there. Like you're only in your own. So yeah, maybe you can just talk at somebody or put on a little bit of a show. Even sometimes people are just living behind their masks that they're putting up and talking to a screen at, because they don't have to be that real with somebody in person. But it changes up pretty dramatically when you're in person.
And that's all about masks, right?
Yeah.
You know, what we wear as a mask to hide how we're really feeling, it makes it a lot easier to put on a mask through the computer screen. And you know, a lot of the stuff we see on the internet, especially with social media, is almost like a false world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really people being themselves. And so it's interesting to hear you say, you know, you've talked to people who are saying, well, I can really be myself behind the screen. And I'm wondering, like, be yourself behind the screen. How
Yeah.
how are you yourself behind the screen? Like, it's like another layer of masking. You know,
Yeah.
I could be like, I'm technically, I am wearing pants right now, but I could like literally not be wearing pants. You'd be like, wow, Jordan really put himself together and got dressed and he did his hair and put on a shirt. And it's like, oh, just kidding, I don't even have pants on.
Yeah.
That's just one silly example, but I could not. It's very hard to really feel into someone else's experience in the same way through a screen. So that those masks are the equivalent in every day. So when you talk to your wife, you know, when you talk to your friends, when you talk to your clients or your students, you know, what masks you have on change that interaction, right?
Yeah.
You know, and masks, usually we don't know what they are. Like they thrive in our subconscious.
Well, and that's the crazy thing. That's like what's becoming even more and more prevalent. That's what I honestly feel like I'm getting like more and more grateful for through this work too. Is like I've been like taking masks off more so even in just the last 2 years, more and more. And part of it comes down to like when I'm like, I just want to break down to who I am, to who I am, to who I am. And I don't want to be different. And I'll even be something. My wife has to almost defend me a lot because you joked earlier, like you don't keep a lot of friends that way. But I'm literally the same way to everybody. Like
Yeah.
I communicate the exact same way to every single person. People probably think I'm a jerk to my daughter because I don't talk like she's a baby. Like I talk to her like she's a human because she is. I don't,
Yeah.
you know, I understand where she's at in her development. And of course I'm like kind to her, like, oh, she fell. I'm like, hey, you hurt yourself. Do you want to get up? But same thing. If someone else fell, I would just be like, hey, you hurt yourself. Do you want to get up? And
Yeah.
every person that I talk to,
You're
because
not all coochie coochie coo. Oh my goodness, boo boo boo.
yeah, I'm not. And that's just it. Like I never,
Yeah.
from day one, she was a tiny baby. Maybe I get a little gentler. I'm just like, hey, it's okay. But I'll do that to
Yeah.
other people too. Like someone's crying, I'd be like, hey, do you need a hug? Like what's going
Yeah.
on? And I think it's something that it's, you know, some people hear me say things to them and they misinterpret it. And they've even said it to my wife. They're like, he seems pretty rough. And she's like, well, what did he say? And they're like, well, he said this. And she's like, what's weird about that? They're like, I don't know. I just think he was meaning something else. She's like, no, if he said that, that's what he meant. Like there's no mask. There's no like, I'm being passive aggressive. I'm being this. It's like, I'm just telling you what the truth is. But it's so normal as a culture for somebody to be trying to hide something in their words
Right.
that it's weird to people when you're just being 100% authentic and just saying what you mean and being truthful.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And that's really, you know, I see that a lot with people that I work with who are involved in like the dating scene.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I
That's
should do a whole podcast on that.
That's a
Even
whole
though I've never dated anyone, like anyone I've ever met. Like I've never dated. I've met someone and I've been like, oh yes, you and I have something. Let's explore that. That was that.
Me and my wife were roommates, and then we got together.
Yep. Same
best
actually for
friends,
me and my wife.
roommates.
We moved into a house where I lived with a few friends, and a couple of months later we were dating. But we weren't dating. We were together. It was just like, I think this thing is going to be a thing.
Yep.
Okay, now it's a thing.
Yeah.
Because I feel this way. It wasn't like, oh, I need to like evaluate some list and like make sure if you check all my boxes and I need to dress up so that you think I'm somebody else, or, you know,
Yeah.
there's none of that. And I've never had that with anyone that I've ever been with. So, and it's been 15 years now with my wife. So something about how people date and what I hear are like horror stories now. I mean,
Yeah.
you probably have friends who are in the dating world or scene, or clients who come to you, but people who they'll get on a dating app or they'll get on a dating website, and the person that they're communicating with all of a sudden just ghosts them, or dumps them, or it's not working all of a sudden and then they're somewhere else. And the whole concept that we need to present ourselves in a certain way so that we're acceptable
Yeah.
to other people, that oh, do you like my mask, like, is this the right mask to show to you, and then I'll show you this other mask, and then maybe I'll take it off once in a while, like in my dreams at night in the middle of the night, but then I put it back on in the morning. As initiates, like, that just doesn't fly. Like, we don't
No.
get to like keep our masks on, and we might come across as blunt to somebody else because we're not wearing a mask. We're not wearing there's so many masks because there's layers on layers. There's the, I'm a nice guy, I hope that you like me, how do I come across right now? Underneath all of those layers, what did my mom and dad think about me? Like, all these different emotional, psychological layers or games that we're playing with ourselves. And most people aren't aware that they're playing even one or two of those games. And yet maybe most people are playing dozens or hundreds of those games at the same time. And when you put too many of those games, those masks all together, you get someone who feels lost.
Totally. I mean, it's interesting because even just in that, like the whole dating world thing is crazy because there's apps that you meet people on, right? And you post pictures for people to have prejudgments on if they want to date you or not.
Right.
And I even saw there's like a group of guys that do videos, and it's like one of them is that they make these Tinder or something, I don't know what it is, but like some dating thing, and they make these profiles, and then they get the dating corporation, basically someone that's in charge of the marketing for it, to tell them if they did good or not. And one of them is this guy like eating fried chicken because his favorite food's fried chicken. And then the person's just like, that's terrible. Like, nobody's gonna want to like see you doing that. They're gonna think you're like whatever. And like basically telling them like you're not gonna get them. You want to do this. You want to do this. You want to do this. And it's like it turns into this weird game of don't be yourself. You're supposed to
Right.
post things that attract people. Like, we're not animals. I don't need to fluff my feathers up and show bright colors to like try to attract somebody.
Right.
Yeah, I do that by being myself and just living my life. And like when I'm living my life being authentic and being myself, then that means the person that is actually attracted to me will come to me, rather than, it's easy to put something out there and make yourself appear attractive and get like 20 people interested in you, but none of them could be anyone that's really good for you because you
Right.
just put yourself out there as something you're not.
Right. Exactly. And then there's always going to be, there's never just one or two or three masks that go with that. There's so many layers of masks. And so masks have a way that they attract each other too.
Yeah.
Right. So
Totally.
you're putting a lot of masks on and you're saying, well, I want to be authentic, because I hear that buzzword authenticity, and it's kind of like, at this point when I hear someone say like, we're going to do some stuff that's authentic, I'm like, just stab me in the heart right now, because because no, you're not. Like, you're going to talk about what it might be like to think about, feeling, thinking, philosophizing 10 layers deep about being authentic, but yet having a lot of masks on at the same time. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about, like, people have the language these days, the language of spiritual bypassing,
Yeah.
and the ability to talk themselves into circles and corners and say, wow, I really have deep understanding of myself because I know like a lot of good words and complex rationalizations to myself.
Yeah.
But that's not the same thing as actually knowing yourself, and that's not going to help you feel any less lost in life if you are just really good at navigating your masks.
Yeah, that's literally like saying like I know myself because I've looked at my wardrobe and I see what I wear. Like that's not like, not that you know yourself, it's just that you know what you put on yourself. Like,
Yeah.
who are you without all those things? Who are you truly? Like, what are you not covering yourself up with? And like you said, to that point, like that's how people do get lost, because they're not
Yeah.
really looking at themselves. They may just have that mask that they wear all the time, not even that they change it out
Mhm.
depending on who they're with. There's the 10 masks that they wear all the time nonstop that they have gotten so used to that they think this is who I am. And
Yeah.
so when they live their life in accordance to this is who I am, when that's not really who they are, they're living their life for somebody else's in somebody else's alignment, in those masks alignment, right?
Yeah.
There's,
Sounds like the zombie apocalypse.
I mean,
We're
maybe,
living in the zombie apocalypse. And we're the zombies in that case.
yeah,
I mean, maybe not me and you, but the average person is living in that state where there's so many masks that to really get down to an authentic connection with themselves, much less another person, is like this. It's like you're more likely to get struck by lightning
yeah.
um, than you are to develop an authentic moment when you have a ton of masks on.
Well, it's one of those things, and I know this from personal experience. It's not like it's tough to say. It's tough to find the words to say it. I did in the school. There's the healing called the spiritual drug detox,
Yeah.
and I did that, and that's literally a huge part of it is like removing all these masks that I've been wearing since birth that have basically, been things that I've identified with that aren't really me.
Right.
Right. And it's like, as it's going along, it's almost like the thing that I can't find words for it. Like, it starts to feel like you're almost going crazy. Like, I've
Right.
been on the brink of going crazy before. It's not like you're going crazy. It's just that you don't know how to identify yourself anymore, because
When you
you're
take
losing.
off so many masks.
Yeah, you're losing your personality.
Right.
Like, you're not your personality. That's the persona, which is the mask. Like, that's the thing that it's not you. You are an individuated being that has so much more than just what you put onto the world.
Right.
So it's like, what is that? What
Yeah.
is like the background that's putting out that voice that's actually putting those masks on? Because the masks also, to some degree, correlate with who you are. Like, you put them on for a reason,
Right.
right?
And
But
they're why you were using drugs, or
yeah,
why when I was a teenager, I was using drugs because of all the masks,
mm-hmm,
and the different wounds that build up over the years. Usually by the time, at least for me, by the time I was like, I remember when I was younger, like 14, 15, 16, I like really didn't feel like using drugs or alcohol. But by the time I was 17 or 18, something in me was like, yeah, I think I need to use some drugs and alcohol. And then by the time I was 19, I just sort of, I burned through a lot of it really quickly. So I went into
yeah,
drugs and alcohol like really intensively and quickly, and then came out of it pretty quickly. So I was like, whoa, I was trying to find myself, but I just got more lost.
yeah,
The masks were the thing in me that was calling out to use those substances so
mm-hmm,
that I could avoid having to feel what I was really feeling. And in the whole process of avoiding things, I ended up putting on more masks, pretending
totally,
even more and more that I was somebody else. So when you go through, the drug detox series that you mentioned that we do in the mystery school, it's like that series of sessions, and you start taking off so many masks, and you start losing that orientation to your old personality. It really requires that we reorient to our higher self,
mm-hmm,
toward who we really are, whatever you call that, higher self, true self, divine self, eternal self. It doesn't really matter what we call it, but that we need to get oriented to that as like our sort of guiding star, so that we're not wandering around looking for the next mask or looking for the next person or experience that's going to match the mask that I'm already wearing
right,
to make me feel better about it.
totally. And like, even to your point that you had even said a little earlier and kind of hit on now, it's like a lot of times too, I think we get confused because we find something that makes us feel better. And for you and for me, it was actually doing drugs, when we're like, oh, cool. And it adds all these masks. It may take some off. Like, that's something that is the trick. And I think
When
that's
you're high in the moment.
totally. And
Right.
it's like, for me, it had a little bit of a long-term thing. I'm like, oh, I don't have that in my life anymore. But I added these 4 more masks. So I got rid of
Yeah.
one and added, 4 more.
Right.
Right. But you almost are just like, I'd rather have those 4 than these, instead of
Mhm.
thinking I'd rather have none.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like we compromise in life so often and so readily to be able to be, and that's what keeps us going further down the lost rabbit hole, is just being like, I'm willing to compromise. As long
Mhm.
as this can get better, I don't mind if all these things are a little worse, because
Right.
those being worse I can handle, this one I can't.
Yeah. And that's often the root of a lot of addictive behavior too, in relationships and in life.
Yeah.
is when we compromise too much of ourselves. It's not just little tiny things. It's like we're compromising core elements of, again, like I said, sometimes when people use the word authenticity, I feel like, I'm stabbing myself in the heart, but
Which I use all the
because
time,
it's
so I'm just stabbing you over and
no,
over.
but I mean, when they use it and they're not being authentic,
Yeah.
we're gonna do this authentic thing, and I'm like, oh my god, we're not okay.
Really cool. You have
But
to state that we're doing it, but cool.
right, but when we're authentically, when we're really knowing ourselves, and we are taking off our masks, then we don't need to create any more pain. We don't need to go create like another layer of suffering.
Yeah.
And it's like for some people, even a few years into the mystery school, if they're addicted to like the drama of creating more pain in their lives, it can be really hard to break that addiction.
It's because they don't know they're addicted.
Right. Or even if they see it, they don't see all the twists and turns.
Yeah.
They don't see all the different ways that plays out in their daily life, that this is actually like drama is an addiction. Being stuck in a cycle where you think something's happening to you, you think that there's always there's what's really happening, and then there's your story about what's happening.
Yep.
And if you're always putting a story on what's happening, you're never in that moment to really experience it, and therefore you're just going to stay lost. You're going to stay like you're going to keep moving through the story that you think this is what's happening. And whether we want to call that lost or illusion or fantasy or whatever it is, that's a major world problem right now, of people saying like, well, this is my story about the things that are going on in my life. Yeah. But they're not even present for the things that are going on.
I mean, that's even, you asked earlier, like what helped me to like shift and change a lot of stuff. And it was coming to those understandings. Like, what am I actually, like, I've done drugs and stopped doing drugs. And I'm like, I wasn't addicted. It was just something I did. But I didn't realize how many things I was truly addicted to until I actually started to like reflect inward and realize like, I used to just be super poor. Like when I met you, I think just doing dishes in a cafeteria. Like that was like my job, and it was minimum wage or something. And I saved up for months to get the life activation. And then it went into like smaller increases in jobs or whatever. But I was always addicted to not having money. Like as much as it seems so abstract, people are like, why would you ever have that? It's like, it was the illusion story that I told myself. Like it was something that it was like easy to be like, because I also used to say like, I hate money. I don't like it. I don't want it in my life. It's evil. It's, terrible in all these ways. And that's what a lot of people say, not knowing that like money is just a tool to do really good things. It's a form of energy. You can transfer it. But at that time in my life, I was so addicted to being like, I don't need it. I'm better off without it. I can live a life of joy without money. Like I can, and it's like almost like trying to prove something, like my negative ego is jumping in, like, you don't need that stuff. You can have a great life without it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I was addicted to being like, I can do it without it.
Right.
But like this, then overcoming that, and all of a sudden, like now I'm plenty abundant in my life too. Like I don't just do the healing work. I have like several offices that like produce money for me from sales and all this stuff like that. Like coming into that place of being, it's like that abundance has made it so that that's a new transformation of myself. Like when you see like, oh, every time I see you change, it's like every couple of years, I literally have a huge transformation. And it's because I'm breaking away those like you remove a mask, you're a new person, like, or at least you're closer to who you truly are. And that's like, the closer you get to who you truly are, it's like that when you see those people, you're like, oh my gosh, you're manifesting things in your life. You're creating this world around you. You're becoming yourself to the highest degree. Like you're forming all these connections and powerful impacting just things in the world. Like, how is this all happening? And it's like, oh, I'm getting rid of the garbage that doesn't serve me anymore.
Yeah. It's huge. Amazing. We're actually over our time here, and that flew. So I wish we could keep going, but my aim is to have these podcasts just be like 45, 50 minutes.
Cool.
So
right on. Well, then we'll do it again.
We had awesome conversation. I really enjoyed it. And we'll have to do this again, like you said, at some time in the future. In a few months, maybe we can have you back on.
That'd be cool.
And chat about some more amazing topics. So thank you so much. Again, this is Jake LoPresti as my guest tonight. I'm Jordan Bain, Modern Mystery School, and this podcast is called Unveiling. Tonight was about how to get unlost. So thank you all for tuning in. Hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you again, Jake. Take care.
You be well.
Be well. Bye-bye.